Hey everyone, and welcome back to Navigating Mood and Metabolism. It's our Women in the Round community where we're coming together as women, just transforming our relationship with food, fitness, and our bodies. So, we've been talking about mood and metabolism based on my new book, The Overnight Diet. And we talked about intermittent fasting in previous episodes and how it affects our metabolism, how to space meals. But today we had some questions that came in. And let me look at them and see exactly what they are for today. And one of the questions was, I'm stressed, and could that be affecting my ability to lose weight? And here we are again, Dr. Laurel and myself. We're going to tackle some of the key points that will actually help answer this question and then give some practical advice on how to work with it. Hello, Dr. Laurel. Thank you again for being here with us and shedding some light on this whole thing with women and metabolism, the weight issues that we have in midlife. Let's start with the first point that we put together on cortisol's impact on our appetite and fat storage. Now, all of you know that cortisol we're talking about when we're stressed. And stress is so prevalent right now that is something that we should really talk about because as women age, our estrogen levels change, right? They drop, and it's much more difficult for our body to navigate stress. So let's start with that. Dr. Laurel, what have you found in your clinical practice with, you know, people that come to you with stress and weight management and the things that we've been talking about over the last several weeks?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This is a very important aspect of our ability to maintain a healthy weight or lose weight. When, and you and I both work with women who are more mature and have a few years, and the effect becomes even more profound as we age, as you know.
Right. And I remember when we talk about, when we think about stress, whenever we have stress, it increases our cravings for high sugar and high fat foods. With right off the bat, that's going to increase our weight to begin with. And I say weight because it's pretty hard to metabolize a high sugar diet and also a high fat laden diet. And I'm not saying give up fat at all. As I'm getting older, I put more fat into my diet. But we tend, and we've been discussing this each week, we tend as we get older because of the estrogen changes, our receptors, meaning receptors that are in the body, they send signals to our brain and to our fat cells and all the other cells for actually. And it changes, and we store more fat in our abdomen. And we know, Dr. Laurel, you brought that up. When we have that weight in the abdomen, we're not talking about for aesthetics here necessarily, all the metabolic consequences of that. You want to just briefly talk to us about that for those that might have not gone to previous interviews that we've done together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I of course, consider both aspects. I want to, stay looking healthy and attractive, but I am also concerned about the long-term health impact when we are carrying more weight around our midsection. And some of the key issues are it's related to our increased risk for diabetes, and we've talked a lot about the insulin connection there. We want to keep our insulin levels balanced so our body isn't getting the signal from it to store fat. But then there's also a lot of inflammation in our body that is associated with carrying more weight on our gut, and it increases our risk for a host of diseases, from heart disease and you name it, any of the chronic diseases of aging.
So I guess we need to turn to, before we bring up some nutritional components like adaptogens and nutrients, this is all based on the overnight diet where we're talking about the fasting and how fasting affects midlife here. And I want to say it's an important point that we have to really talk about, and it just continues what you're talking about with stress. Stress actually mitigates the benefits of overnight fasting because chronic stress increases our insulin sensitivity and it also biologically changes our cells and causing what you said downstream, we have the inflammation, et cetera, and all the health concerns. So if we want to move around here and look, the person that asked, I'm stressed, could it be affecting my ability to lose weight? Yes, it can. Because also the second point we want to make here, when we're stressed, we can't sleep very well. Or if we're going through hormonal changes, our sleep gets thrown off. Whenever sleep gets thrown off, what happens? It actually causes more stress. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, as we said in our last episode or one of the previous ones, it'll change our appetite control. That's why when you are tired and you wake up tired, you have a tendency to want to eat more because the appetite hormones get all messed up. Remember, we talked about circadian rhythms. So that's very important. So sleep is a foundation for stress relief. And if you want to just say something on stress before we move on to the third point that will help to answer this question, then we'll move on if you have something
No,
you
you know,
want.
you're absolutely right. Studies have shown that if we are not getting enough sleep, like a minimum of 6 hours, and that's really a minimum. I'm leaning more towards 7 or 8 as what we
Right.
really need. But if we don't get a minimum of 6 hours of sleep, we have higher cortisol, the stress hormone, the next day. And so, and as you said earlier, that stress hormone is then defeating all the good things that we're undoing all the good things we're doing with our overnight fast and contributing to insulin resistance and diabetes, so it is a very important part of our overall stress management is getting the sleep we
And
need.
it also affects our mood. It affects our mood. I mean, we're not the same. It's that fluctuation. It's so funny that I had always mentioned when people say get 8 hours, 9 hours, 6 hours of sleep, whatever. It's sleep, but restful sleep. And I'm going to put the word restful in there for those of you that are listening because we can sleep, but if we're having a lot of dreams, we're really restless in our sleep. So the key is, and that's where it's going to move to our third point here, when we're talking about breath work, meditation, those those techniques or those practices, which I've seen over the years in my teachings, have really helped people maintain a restful sleep and a restful life. It's a very different life when you do that. But there's also one other item. I said breath work and meditation, which this isn't about that, but it's good to really learn how to do that in a very skillful, systematic way, not just you're going to get on a video and learn how to do it when you feel like it. It doesn't work that way. It's a cumulative response and a practice that's needed. But Dr. Laurel, why don't you just tell us a little bit about adaptogens, how that can help with this whole concept of what we're talking about with stress?
Yes, yes. I love adaptogens. I rely on them myself. I think nearly everyone in this country probably needs one of these herbs because there's kind of an epidemic of
Yeah.
stress. So, what adaptogens do, you can think of them as helping us adapt better to stress, which literally can mean that when we're taking these herbs, that we have a less intense stress response, as in maybe a less intense cortisol spike when we are under stress. Or on the other hand, there are some of us that might not have high enough cortisol, or at least at times of the day, like maybe your energy crashes around 2 or 3 p.m. because your body is struggling to keep up consistently with the stress and is actually not producing enough afternoon cortisol for you to feel energetic, because cortisol isn't a bad thing, but we need it to be just right. And we need it, of course, to follow the circadian rhythm. You know, if there's one hormone that has a circadian rhythm, it is cortisol. And so
Very true.
I experienced this myself. My cortisol was dropping too low in the afternoon, and I wanted a nap around 2. So I started adding these adaptogenic herbs like American ginseng or rhodiola, and it didn't work overnight. You know, I had to rebuild, strengthen, tonify with these herbs, but it really made a difference. I no longer have that same feeling.
Thank you for that. You know, it's not like the quick fix. It's not like taking a cup of caffeine, which there's nothing wrong with caffeine, but that could also add to stress by depleting the adrenals of their functionality or their hormonal base. And it's interesting, you had mentioned that, the cortisol. So adaptogens are very, very useful. So let's just turn around now, and I've come up with 3 points that might be useful for you to take home about this, especially the person that asked the question, and hope you're listening today, is to do, a 5 minute breathing break. It's just very easy to just sit down and bring yourself back, bring your mind back to the home base where you can just relax and breathe. And I say breathe because breathing is what keeps you alive. And if you breathe, your mind has to follow that. So wherever your mind goes, your breath goes. So you bring yourself back into this place. Herbal allies that Dr. Lorella just spoke about. Use your adaptogenic teas, for example, unless you're working with a healthcare practitioner. Dr. Laurel would vouch for that, and we'll put it in the show notes where you can reach Dr. Laurel if you'd like to work with her. She had mentioned ashwagandha, American ginseng, helping to smooth the cortisol swings. And a sleep ritual. We really need to do a sleep ritual. You know, last night, for example, I was working till 11 o'clock. I didn't even realize how late it was. Well, I had to get into a sleep ritual, change the lighting, get off this blue light of computers.
Mm-hmm.
That means avoiding the screen at least 30 minutes before bed. And I do some practice, some breathing, some bringing myself back to center. And eventually we all slow down and work. So they're the 3 practice actionable tips that we want to give you to take away from this episode, I should say, where we're really answering the question, yes, stress will affect your ability to lose weight for those that are interested in losing weight. Something to think about, and hopefully we answered the question. And it's just very important that we look at that. So if today's conversation really helped you understand, what you struggle with, please let's pass it on. Subscribe if you would. We'd love to hear from you and your comments on today's episode. Which tips really resonate most with you? And what questions do you have for future episodes? The episodes for Women in the Round come from your questions, your concerns, and maybe something you might have even seen or some research that you have questions about. So, again, if this episode is helpful, please give us a thumbs up. It really helps, and subscribe. And until next time, please stay happy, stay calm, and stay strong.